Hi, Mage fans. This is your host, Terry Robinson with Mage the Podcast, and joining me today is co-host Bryce of Darker Days Light Radio, and we're going to talk about everything involving the Void Engineers that isn't space, for some definition of space. So, Bryce, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Terry. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing entirely okay. I have the deadliest thing that can happen to a person with a lot of projects. I have a 3-day weekend where I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to do. So at the end of it, I may have an entire additional book for M20 or Exalted, or I may be like, I carved a peanut to look like a former president. And people would be like, oh, okay. And then
That'd be Jimmy Carter.
yeah, well, I mean, that would be the appropriate one. I mean, while he is still with us, it is only appropriate that I carve a peanut cameo of a former president. You actually were the one who pitched this episode, The Void Engineers Just Not in Space. What do you think is so special about their non-space presence, or why are you tired of hearing about them just being space marines?
So there are 5 conventions in the technocracy, and there is one that is in space. The other 4 do everything on the ground, quote unquote. It's mage. They go to the Umbra, they go hither and yon. But the Void Engineers are pigeon-holed as being they're the space guys.
Mm-hmm.
That's all they are in whatever book you're picking up, whatever you read. 90% of what it talks about the Void Engineers doing is being in space. And while, yes, that is a very important role that they fulfill, it's not the only thing that they do. And I feel that we have some unsung heroes here on the Mudball.
I do like the idea of like calling this the series Unsung Heroes, Technocrats in Strange Places or something like that. I still want to do my weird episode on like Mystic Syndicate members where you look at them and you're like, you're crazy. And they go, I am, but it works. Deal. And then like rips a line or something like that. I don't know. I haven't quite put together an outline for it yet, but I think the content is there. I think the idea is there.
I mean, yeah, the difference between the esoterica of magic and the esoterica of finance is very thin.
Yes.
So, yeah, that works.
Yeah, I think that it became especially clear in like during the game stock phenomenon where I'm like, oh, we are playing by different rules now.
Yeah, we're playing to play, not playing to win. That's for other people. Only losers want to win.
Yeah. It's a heck of a way to play the game, and you can do it for a while. But then again, what's the phrase? The market can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent. So that's something I try and keep in the back of my head. My stepkid is like, how do I short Microsoft? And I have been blessed in that my stepkid has only lobbed at me the softballest problems for me to do. So like the two things they've done, like, how do I calculate this probability? This I know. What are the mechanics of shorting a stock? This I know. How do you weld? I'm like, this is great. They think I'm super competent. and I kind of walk through the process and they're like, wait, you have to wait until the value of the stock actually drops. I'm like, yeah, like eventually you have to mark to market and something like there has to be a touch with at least a notional reality to get a payout or to make a payment. And they're like, oh, that's stupid. They're a bad company. I want my money now. I'm like, well, this is how you do it if you want to. And they ultimately didn't go through it. And then 3 weeks later, after they had still been milling it, the whole thing with OpenAI happened and Microsoft stock tripled or something for a weekend. And for a brief moment, my stepkid would have been worth negative $30,000 or something like that. So glad we ultimately didn't go through with that, because that would have been a margin call that would have consumed their allowance into the 30th century. So
it's a good life lesson to learn.
It's a good life lesson. So before we start talking about what the Void Engineers are doing now, let's kind of talk about where they came from. One of the things I like about technocrat history is it tends to change more than the tradition groups, and it kind of shows you how a tradition or a group can change over time. It's not uncommon that we'll have a description of a tradition that is unchanged for 500 years. Kind of favorite example of that is probably the Celestial Chorus in Revise, where it's like, you've just been on a downward slope for 5 centuries, and the person replies, yep.
Well, that does make sense. They are traditions. So it's kind of right. The hint's right there in the title, Terry.
A little bit, but I still want a publication on like Age of Enlightenment and Age of Sail, Mage, just because I want more information about the period of time where the Euthanatos and the Cults of Ecstasy were just hopping around the world, assassinating members of the Order of Reason until Shazar came back and is like, "You're all being idiots," and everyone's like, "Oh no, we're being idiots." But also the departure of the Kazarify. But yeah, they tend to show groups that change more. The other thing that's kind of interesting, and this very much varies by edition, is the technocracy often hides its own history. Like in 1E and 2E, we got the idea that Terrence White, one of the parties that kind of had a particular idea of how Sleeper Society changed, their work had kind of been buried. And then in Revised, we get the elitist view, the populist view, and kind of this other instrumentalist view of how things change, and that the technocracy is kind of always hiding what it did before in an effort to show we've always been doing this. And kind of that changing history, I think, is interesting because the past of the technocracy can often be the present of a tradition. So a mystic character may discover a decommissioned skyrigger and be like, nope, this works great with my alchemical theory. Or a practitioner of astrology may be like, nope, the celestial masters out of Kerala did the best work in history. Do you find any value in going through history for groups?
Yeah, like this weird group, the Cassirify that you mentioned. Whatever happened to those guys?
Whatever happened to those guys?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, history is important both in the real world and in the game. If we're going to be playing in a dynamic setting such as Mage, you want to know what mistakes to avoid, if nothing else. So things that other people have done before that screwed things up, you probably don't want to do those again, unless that's your plan is to move fast and break things, which is not a great plan.
Yeah. I mean, I think the last member of the March of the Nine we lost was Sister Bernadette in the late 1800s. So the idea that she was still walking around in the Victorian era, I think, is kind of neat. There's a few people that are unaccounted for, but like because of longevity in Mage, some people may be like, no, no, no. I remember when we made that oopsie. Or alternatively, people are like, no, 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 we can do it again and everything will be okay. There was the idea that was floated in second edition of there being the second seven, a new kind of March of the Nine. That group never really coalesced. And I think the only example of it we have is actually in the book Ascension. That was a kind of a fictional through line that Kathy Ryan did. But yeah, both we keep making the same mistakes, and no, 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 this time it'll be different, I think are both perfectly valid. So the Void Engineers trace their origins, or claim to trace their origins, back to the earliest people to experience wanderlust, the desire for no other reason than curiosity or fear to go somewhere else. People left the village or their civilization and either went over the next hill or stumbled into the very present Umbra. So this is before the Sundering, this is before the Shattering, this is where you can sneeze and accidentally cross the gauntlet, if at all the gauntlet existed. So as is so common with Mage, we go from prehistory to like the 14th century.
Nothing important happened in those thousands of years.
Dark ages. So dark. So ages. So the Convention of the White Tower in 1325, two groups within the then formed Order of Reason come into existence. One, the Celestial Masters, which plied the heavens, and the text kind of indicates that they had been around before then, that any number of societies had astronomer priests or something like that that would ply the heavens and look for portents and omens and ideas, and did so kind of in a scientific manner with the belief that whatever the heavens showed, the earth would follow in some way, shape, or form. I kind of like the old idea in Exalted that astrology is done by not seeing what the stars say, but trying to convince the stars to move, because I think that's just kind of a badass way to do things. Like, hey, Sirius, move to your left.
Seriously.
Yeah, seriously. SRSBCNS. So the Celestial Masters were plying the heavens and kind of looking around. Some looked at the predictive powers of stars, while others were looking for augury and astrology as their methods that could be used to influence and control the masses. By doing astrological charts about a king or regent or something like that, you could convince people that this reign was ordained to go well. To me, that was probably the earliest proto-NWO, proto-Void Engineer pair-ups.
At this point, they're still just looking at the stars. They're not really going to the stars yet. They may have a boat that they can sail to the edge of the world, because that might still be a thing now. And they might sail off the edge of the world into the heavens, because that's the paradigmatically, that's super cool at this point in time. We will change that in the future. But for right now, that's as close as we can get to being in the stars.
Yeah, and this is kind of an interesting error because it posits like a fundamentally different relationship between the layers of reality. This was a time where the Irish or Celtic underworld was over the sea, and rather than having to deal with the shroud at this point, you could probably literally sail enough and wind up there, which is, I think that's perfectly fine as an idea to bring back into a contemporary game.
Sure, I mean, if you're in Egypt at this time, all you got to do is go over the other side of that river. You're in
Yeah.
the land of the dead.
Is that Duat? Yeah, they're kind of jerks, but their beds are really soft. The other half are the newly founded Void Seekers, which are exploring the world, and their signs and sigils were the tools of shipwork. This is a very boat-oriented group. This is a very boatomantic group. Their tools are the rope, the sail, the understanding of wind and wave, and the map. The Void Seekers serve the vital role of defining and naming the unknown, often making first contact with new people and strange beings. And the tales that they bring back, again, that weird proto NWO work helps define places that others haven't even been to yet. You designate an area as being infested with sea witches, and that could keep nosy mortals away from a newly discovered cray, node, or area of interest. Designating an area as being full of golden riches could cause sleepers to beat a path along their way, maybe destructively bringing their Christianity with them to kill some fae. I still want a bell that says, like, this bell kills fascists, and by that I mean fae or something like that. I don't know. I was always fan.
Fascists.
Yeah, fae shit.
Both of these methods rather, are paradigmatic ways of shaping the world. While the map may not be the territory, the person drawing the map has an oversized influence on how the territory shapes up, at least for sleepers. And by going back to this is infested with sea witches and monsters. At this point in time, just by believing in that, by having the sleepers believe in that, sea witches and monsters could show up there that weren't there before. It's kind of a double-edged sword. Yeah, it could keep people away, but eventually you might want to stop going there because now there's sea witches and monsters.
And likewise, once they have declared that a route is clear and safe, the belief that the route is clear and safe is going to probably strengthen that very weak initial gauntlet and actually make it to be the case, as just unbelief and banality just kind of start reinforcing those trade routes. The fastest mode of transportation at the time over land is going to be something like a horse, and at sea is going to be the caravel at about 8 knots, possibly covering 100 miles a day, ships having the benefit of potentially being able to move at night. Any sort of skyborne travel at this time is highly vulgar. In Dark Ages Mage, we get a kite that kind of lets you fly crappily, and it's a 5-point artifact. And there's a second 5-point artifact that helps you fly it just a little bit better. So
there's a third 5-point artifact that lets you land without breaking yourself.
Yeah, the rules were basically if the string breaks, you die. Like, it didn't even provide crash systems. I'm like, that's nice. I'm glad that exists. Bryce, what happens in the Sorcerer's Crusade era?
Well, as of the Sorcerer's Crusade, the Void Engineers remain 2 separate groups, still called the Celestial Masters and the Void Seekers. The Celestial Masters at this time are operating out of the mathematics hub of Kerala, which would have been part of a region of small warring states until unified under the, and I'm going to butcher this word, Vijayanagra Empire. Vijayanagra.
What is now the state of Kerala in India, the Vijayanagara Empire in about 1443.
Thank you for pronouncing that for me. I will continue.
Yes.
As a guess, their economic power may have come from being able to guide lucrative ships on the spice trade, with the region hosting pepper, cardamom, clove, cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, and turmeric. Delicious, flavorful spices brought to you by Maps. They had several subgroups in the Celestial Masters. The House Selene, Masters of Prophecy, known as Cassandras. Some think the future is not absolute and attempt to change it, like Terry said earlier, by influencing the stars to do things that the stars don't necessarily say they're going to do. In addition, we have House Prometheus, who prefer seclusion and study and want to confirm prophecy. And I'm pretty sure that they're called House Prometheus because they read entrails. And famously, Prometheus got his liver torn out every day.
On the daily.
We have House Daedalus, who lead expeditions around the world. They're often jacks of all trades and view themselves as the elite of the order, interacting with monarchs and empires and courtiers And finally, we have the House of Helios, who are the skyriggers of the era who work closely with the House of Selene, mentioned previously. They bring back stolen treasures from cultures and creatures that they find for the Selenites to use in their prophecies. So, if you want to influence the stars, you might need a special doodad from some faraway island. You send out the House of Helios. They go to that island, they get that doodad.
This is also from a time where just kind of the map to the Umbra had kind of been established. I mean, the Sorcerer's Crusade Umbra is not quite the contemporary Umbra, but it's a little bit closer. So to me, all of these records and archives kind of split the difference between, do we want to save little bits of our history and remember where we came from? And also, well, this map can literally lead you into the underworld, or this may still be accurate enough that it is tied to a particular Incarna or Celestine. Back when just about everything the Order of Reason did had a very strong levels of emanation, right order of the cosmos, Christian outflowing of how the cosmos operated. So just about everything from this era has this certain layer of religiosity baked into it that I could imagine the contemporary group is both uncomfortable with, but also kind of proud of how far they've come.
Yeah, absolutely. Terry says religiosity, but it's definitely Christianity specifically.
Mm-hmm.
There may be members of the Void Seekers or members of the Celestial Masters who are not Christians, who practice other faiths or who practice no faith whatsoever, but they are going to be few and far between, and they will not make their way up the ladder very far.
Yeah, and this is kind of an era where even if the Order of Reason had disparate power bases, it is kind of being consolidated in Europe regardless.
The Void Seekers also had just a ton of little internal groups, starting with the Odysseans, who set forth across the waves, left the lodge behind. They're often sponsored by another convention. They draft a charter indicating who gets what. They're often in charge of settling issues on the journey. So these are the guys who, if you have a party that's going to a foreign land and you want to get there safe and secure, these are the guys who lead the way.
And this was a group to me that was interesting because they are spending a lot of their time with mortals, maybe what we would later call extraordinary citizens or custos or grogs or something like that. But they're kind of the person that is asked to go on a venture to make sure that it succeeds. They may not obviously be the captain, but their goal is kind of to put down any problems that may come around. Again, with that weird thing that throughout the history of the Void Engineers, there's been kind of this thread of influencing and subduing the beliefs of the consensus.
Next up, we have the Alexandrians, who journey overland to areas outside of Europe. They specialize in culture and language. So you can think of these as kind of the ambassadors of the group. They will be the ones who interact with those heathen devils traveling over land. But in the mid and far east, these are the void seekers that you're most likely to run into.
Land Seeker as opposed to Sea Seeker. This kind of always struck me as the group that would kind of be most interested in both appreciating and wanting to destroy the web of faith, like, or suddenly learning the importance of it and keeping like Jin down and so on. This to me struck me as the ones where it's like, oh, there really is something weird happening over here, because if you drop into a port city, you're just getting the port experience. It has that certain kind of cosmopolitan feel to it. But again, these are the cultural and language experts. They're the ones that knowledges aren't dump stats for them, and just kind of having to travel over the Eurasian plain is probably a journey just as treacherous at this time as trying to cover any distance oversea.
Do you think they're the ones who converted the web of faith to be more about oil than about holy sites? Or
the Jazz Age Mage of Sykes-Picot is something that kind of fascinated me. We never really got information on kind of that flip between the two. By then, the reorganization had already happened, but I imagine their notes are the ones that were used to piece together this web of faith that ultimately some syndicate member or some Golden Guild member or some invisible exchequer, dumbest name of a convention ever, anyway, pieces together and goes, no, we can flip this. I don't know if they were directly responsible for it. Indirectly, very much so. I imagine them having the most accurate overland maps at this time.
Speaking of which, the Order of the Grail, talking about dumb names, compiles maps and sagas and use mystic rites to seal what has been written and explore the blank places of the world. This is quote lifted verbatim from the book that describes them. It doesn't really go into any detail about their mystic rites or how they seal what has been written. But I mean, I'm assuming that this is the Sorcerer's Crusade equivalent of the Indiana's Jones.
The other big
So
thing to me that came across is I imagine their rites and rituals were also good at one, dealing with weird variants of the Umbra to force it to conform to kind of the uniform Umbra we start seeing in Europe at this time. Like we get an idea in Wraith that like, maybe the relationship between the Skinlands and the Shadowlands is a little bit different depending on where you go. And this group was responsible for kind of dragging that uniformity with it, like as if it was almost like a walking shattering in Changeling the Dreaming terms. And I imagine like those rites and rituals start out as like, we have conducted the survey, we know the land, we understand it, we have brought it under our dominion. And there it is a very formal recognition that as men, almost invariably men, they have been given direct dominion by God over this region. And kind of in contemporary terms, they probably have little flourishes within the Void engineers that copy this, that whenever a new Umbral realm is charted, that whenever a new Everett volume is charted, that they've kind of inherited some of these rites and rituals to kind of stabilize it. And in this case, you might have a first draft which lays out this is what we think it is, and by exploring it you kind of set that in space, and that when you complete the survey that is kind of the capstone of a grand ritual or a grand rite or a great work of some sort that kind of fixes that area in the firmament. We get the idea later of void correspondence, basically, that if you create very accurate maps of where you're starting and where you're going, you have the ability to move across vast distances very quickly. To me, the Order of the Grail is kind of the group that figured out those things. The better we knew our starting and end point, the faster we would be able to transit between them and kind of exert this level of dominion over them.
a different kind of correspondence. I like it. Next up, we have the League of St. Paul, who purge heathen sins, cleanse tainted sites, and bring Jesus to benighted peoples. They work hand in hand with the Gabrielites and are viewed within the Order of Reason as a route for quick advancement through the ranks.
Kind of united the scientific aspect of what they were doing, the dominionist aspect of what they were doing, and the Christian aspect of what they were doing all under one area.
They're just, the best of all the worlds.
Which is to say, probably the most destructive if you're not big on those things at the time.
Yeah. If you are one of the previously noted benighted peoples, you don't want to see them coming up to your doorstep. Also, the Gabrielites, who are religious fanatics. Not a lot really that I have to say about them. I do like the cleansing tainted sites bit. That seems like something that Void engineers in the modern day would do, but they would call it something entirely different.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious what their first version of the Quelaw Machine was. I like the idea that it was still a void ship, but it was about this big, like about the size of a bread box or something like that. And it just kind of went up from there.
Next up is the Herculean Compact, who considered themselves the elite, and new members are selected by existing members. It's invite only, folks. They assert that their 7 labors include slaying monsters and protecting companions. They have some really good stories, but they seem pretty into themselves. These might be where a lot of the extraordinary citizens show up. They're the ones who are protecting the real mages. Then again, they might be, they might graduate to real magehood and, just like to bash in monster heads. Someone's got to do it.
This to me felt like the Void Seeker version of the Ethernauts and Adventurer contingent within the Society of Ether, where it's like, why did you destroy that temple? Duh, for science. Yeah, science.
Yeah.
What is it for? So, again, they pick membership from their own. We get the idea that the Herculanean Compact is kind of set up to be a counterpoint to every other group that thinks that it has the best of the best. And it's like, well, here's our best of the best. So, yeah, tryhards with good stories.
The Guild of Forge and Sail, or Lycians, are the ones who craft the ships, instruments, and weaponry that aid the other Seekers. They're very sought after and tend to be part of lodges dominated by Seekers. These are the guys who actually put hammer to metal and build the tools that everybody else is using. They might not be the most fun mage to play, but they're definitely a mage that you want to know.
Yeah, and we get a brief peek into this during, I think, Swashbuckler's Handbook and Sorcerer's Crusade, that like there's a whole ritual where every member throws their nail into a bucket, and the one that is drawn is the one that oversees the construction of a new Skyrigger. And I just kind of thought that was neat. And again, we could have this weird contemporary ritual where everyone throws their USB-C thumb drive with the plans for their next void ship into a bucket before it gets kind of pulled off. Again, at least in the US Navy and several other navies around the world, there are a lot of traditions that go back centuries and have come up with modern incarnations, and being kind of familiar with these lets you add that history and flavor, because this is a group that very much sees continuity in what it's doing compared to what previous versions of the convention did.
And finally, the scribes of Apollo, or Apollonians, work closely with the celestial masters, charting the earth and stars. So even within the group, there's a group that mirrors the other half of the group.
You're not so different, you and I. And kind of at this time, the fastest way to move around, it's not quite big yet, but in the 1500s is going to be the galleon, which is moving at about maybe 9 to 10 knots. But this is also the era of Skyriggers, ships held aloft by ether who cut through the heavens using massive silver rudders. We get kind of two explanations. One is the idea that you can keep a craft aloft with air because air is lighter than water, thus air is above it. These are vessels that contain massive balloons of ether, which is even lighter than air, thus the ether being further out there. We also get the alchemical explanation that silver hates the earth and is drawn towards the moon. Thus, if you have enough of it, you will just kind of be like, boop, launch skyward, which kind of makes me wonder how they land the things. But we never really get that much information on their actual mechanics in comparison to balloons, which are defined in like 17 places.
You land it by, you cover the silver with lead, which is of the earth.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Put a lead jacket over it like it's going to the dentist.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think there is anything interesting or special contained within kind of like that Sorcerer's Crusade write-up of what these groups are?
Yeah, I like that this is still the era of science and mysticism kind of mixing and meshing together. It's not something, it's heresy nowadays. We don't call it heresy, but it's neat to look back and see, okay, so we used to do it this way and we still do it this way because now it's tradition. It has nothing to do with none of that mystic stuff that they thought. We just do it that way still because of we want to honor our forebears who showed us the way. I think that's a neat little thing that you could have in your game. There's not a lot of practical use in a modern game for any of these guys aside from like, if you find their old treasures and you try to get them to work kind of deal. It's just neat to know.
Yeah, to me, one of the things that you can always do with Sorcerer's Crusade is if you want to posit a different kind of technocracy where it is not the modern 5 conventions, where maybe there are different technomantic societies out there, this gives you a framework. This is kind of back when the technocracy was less integrated. You would have a Voidseeker Lodge, a group of mages that were luminaries, or what I always called reasonists because I could never remember the actual word for it. They kind of kept to their own kind. So you have this microcosm of the entire technocracy within the Voidseekers and within the Celestial Masters at this time. So if you wanted to posit an alternative history where the Lightkeepers never turn into the NWO or the Syndicate never gets started, but there is this technomantic exploration society or maybe craft mages, I think this is a neat framework to start from.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Alternate settings, that's a good idea.
The next era where we get information is the Victorian Age. In this era, the two groups, the Voidseekers and the Celestial Masters, are part of the Explorators bloc in the Albertan Reformation of 1851, or the Exploratory Society, before formally merging in 1897 to form what we know as the Void Engineers. They butt heads with the Grand Faculty because they're generally exploitative. The Grand Faculty is much more interested in let us teach everyone and uplift all of humanity. And the Lightkeepers, in contrast, are like, why are you spending so much time actively going out and finding crazy shit?
I get what the Lightkeepers are trying to say here. We already have enough monsters and stuff to deal with at home. Why are you going out to find more monsters and stuff for us to deal with? I don't necessarily agree with them, but I get why they're why the heads are being butted.
It reminds me of the Patton Oswalt bit about like science sometimes gives us stuff that we don't need. Like science, we're about coulda, not shoulda. We made cancer airborne and contagious. Have fun, kids. And you're like, why did you do that?
Because we could.
Yeah, exactly. This is the first era where we seemingly have proper space travel into something we would recognize as space. In 1892, Archmaster Tychoides and Captain Savage, which I don't think we get any more information about later, lands on the moon, while in 1893, Autothonia is discovered orbiting Earth at the opposite point, at our opposite Lagrange point. I can never remember the numbers of it. I'm going to say 5 or 4. It's 1, 4, or 5. I can't remember which. But it's like, well, this is a thing. We also get a early member of the Virtual Adepts that awakens the machine in Autothonia at that point. And just kind of as a reference, the fastest trains of the era went about 30 miles per hour at the beginning of the Victorian era, and more than double in speed, going over 80 miles per hour at the end of the era. Rockets presumably were going faster, but who knows?
Yeah, I did the math here. At 80 miles per hour, it would take 2,986 hours and 15 minutes, or approximately 124 and a half days to cover the distance between the Earth and the moon. So if you're going there on your train, bring plenty of limes.
I love the fact that we had identified the curative power of limes before we knew the mechanism of scurvy, which is why it's referred to as ascorbic acid, literally anti-scurvy juice. We don't know how it works, but it stops people from dying. So that kind of brings us to the modern group of the Void Engineers. We get this note in Revised that their view of ascension is tied with the process of seeking, that going out there and discovering the world unifies humanity, that seeing what is out there and realizing that we can explore and discover is what makes us our best and what allows us to ascend. One of the ideas that's introduced in Technocracy Reloaded, or at least that Travis Legg, developer of Technocracy Reloaded, said in an interview about Technocracy Reloaded, is the modern technocracy is broken up into 5 groups. On one end, you have the progenitors and the syndicate, which have this maximalist view of the individual being the prime force of change and action. And on the other end, you have Iteration X and the New World Order that are like, no, it is the collective. And kind of square in the middle are the Void Engineers. And I kind of like that as an explanation of where they stand paradigmatically in modernity. What do you think about that?
I think it'd be great if that was actually in Reloaded, but I don't remember reading that.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that I really agree with seeking as their whole paradigm, their whole quest for ascension. The Void Engineers paradigm, like all the other conventions of the technocracy, boils down to better living through technological progress. This could be space exploration, it could be finding cures for diseases, it could be all sorts of, progress. Things, moving forward, eliminating problems that we have, finding new problems, eliminating them. The Void Engineer's particular expression of that paradigm is with discovery, and this is my interpretation, with discovery comes unforeseen dangers. We are there to defend humanity against those dangers. It's an unknown unknown, to quote a famous saying, but they are prepared to face the unknown unknowns. That's their job. In addition, they're the group pushing to expand humanity from the planet Earth. So they also kind of have a big balloon theory of humanity going on. That's a thing from the Dune novels.
The Golden Path.
It's part of that. The Golden Path leads to a human race that is spread throughout the universe in such a way that a disaster here does not signify the end of humanity everywhere.
Yeah, they're the let's not put all our eggs in one existential basket group.
I mean, that's a way to say it if you just want to not sound smart, I guess. Big balloon theory sounds better.
Okay.
But yes, they're trying not to put all of humanity's eggs into one tiny, fragile blue basket.
And kind of before we talk about the contemporary state, we have to deal with 2 facts. One, the book that had the largest amount of information about the Void Engineers was convention book Void Engineer for Revised, which I think is one of the best Mage books.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in terms of content. The other thing is this is the group within Mage that is most affected by what is referred to within the Union as the dimensional anomaly or the Avatar Storm. We get this idea that when the Avatar Storm hit, which was a massive storm created during the Week of Nightmares or at the end of the Week of Nightmares because of this a huge amount of death and psychic damage and damage to the Umbra as we know it. Spirit nukes were ignited, not quite spirit nukes were ignited. An antediluvian was killed by orbital space mirrors that literally space stations started crashing out of the sky. And there was suddenly a scramble as they were pushed out of the Umbra and into mundane space to kind of deal with that. That's something like in the first few hours, something like, I think it was 30% they mentioned, of Void engineers were just gone. Exploration missions were mounted to find them, few of them ever being successful. And one of the things that occurs is the Void engineers assume a much more war-oriented footing. Now, we're not really talking about the space aspect of things, but in your game, the choice of how they respond to the dimensional anomaly, if the dimensional anomaly occurred in your game, is very much going to inform probably what your boots on the ground Void engineer thinks of their convention. They may be a mission specialist or an adjunct that is like, hey, I just collect funguses in the rainforest. I don't like the fact that the person I report to is a lieutenant and I have to get a physical exam every 6 months, even though that has nothing to do maybe with what I'm doing, or I have to do range practice, or I have to be able to understand how to launch a breach charge or something like that. So that background is going to kind of inform how you use it, even if you are focusing more on the earthly side of the Void engineers. What did you think of the revised Void engineer book and kind of where it set them up to be?
The revised Void Engineer book led directly to this podcast episode because it focuses a lot on the space aspect. It mentions, oh yeah, there's this whole other half of our convention over here that never leaves the Earth. They're the guys who are out in the rainforest collecting fungi samples so that the progenitors can find a cure for cancer or clean energy through growing whatever this thing is they scraped off the tree. Yeah, they exist. Anyway, back to space.
Yeah.
It's great. And it's, like you said, it's very well written.
Because revised was street level, which is why we have so much about...
Which is why we have everything in space. Yeah. Exactly. They're paving the roads.
I feel like revised with street level is like the mage equivalent of Mussolini made the trains run on time. Like this thing that we all just tell ourselves that lasted for approximately 3 books. But
I mean, they said when they started it was going to be street level. And I was so excited because I wanted to see how the Void engineers would be focused on Earth, on the things that happen in your campaign that takes place here, not in the Umbra, because there was that Avatar storm. You can't get there from here.
Mm-hmm.
And then they walked that back in like the second book.
It took a couple books, but yeah, by Ascension, there were at least 12 ways, by my reckoning, to bypass the Avatar storm, which I am fine with, because if narratively your goal is to prevent people from just slipping off to the Umbra to avoid all problems, disembodiment still a heck of a thing to deal with, and it now does require a little bit of planning, so you can't just step sideways when the popos arrive.
I agree. It's nice that we have options, but I wish they had stuck with it, at least paid lip service to their original idea, because the Void Engineers book, like you said, well written, is not for most campaigns unless you're playing a specifically Void Engineer game.
Yeah. The other thing to give there, which is something we discussed with Ryan Macklin, who was the developer with CCP when they produced the 4 convention books. We had Iteration X, which was produced under White Wolf when it was still in Stone Mountain, and then the next 4 books that were produced under CCP. Years later, the last Technocracy book was released after the Werewolf Kickstarter had happened for W20. So,
and I bought it.
Yep.
This one right here.
Yep.
Alphabetical, yeah.
What methodology do you want to start with?
Let's go ahead and start with the Earth Frontier Division, because that's a big old methodology. The Earth Frontier Division is tasked with going to the far and away places here on the planet. They handle everything from the highest highs of the mountains to the lowest lows of the trenches in the ocean. And we're going to start with the ocean. The Aquatic Exploration Team, known affectionately as Squids, Aquanauts pioneer the exploration of the deep sea. In the wake of the Reckoning, they are tasked with the construction of several new constructs for the Union in remote places. In Revised, the Yamaja Station at the bottom of the ocean was their center of activity. Yeah, if you want to have some deep sea exploration, or if you really enjoy the Meg, which I saw recently, these are your technocrats.
The Abyss, Sphere, yeah.
No, we can't do the Abyss or Sphere because both of those involve aliens.
Uh, Noted. Yes, reasonable. The thing that I really liked was that shift to the oceanic bases. That it really showed to you that, like, going through the ocean is just as treacherous as stepping sideways in terms of difficulty of accessing it, but still these areas where it was very thin. We did an episode, Blood in Tides, talking about kind of the umbral reflection of these areas and kind of what weird things happen out there. And this being the group that primary interfaced with that, I think is kind of interesting. They also give the idea that because they are Earthside and so far from the rest of reality, from the rest of like sleeper society, that weird things start happening, that weird tulpas might start to appear. They would probably come up with a different term for it, like emergent adaptogenic etheric entities or something like that, that would be turned into a utterly unpronounceable abbreviation or something like that. And they also talk about the idea that there was the Wall, this place where everyone who lost someone due to the dimensional anomaly posted here. And there was just such an outpouring of pathos that reality was thinning there. And I very much like the idea that, much like when you and I get around to talking about the esoterists at some point, did we already do an esoterist episode, or did we just talk about it?
I think we just talked about it.
Yeah. There is a risk with actually having too many technocrats in an area with a thin gauntlet, that they can cause weird things to appear because of the force of their belief and kind of the potency of their genius. So I like the idea that we need to have a technocracy where, no, we can't have these grand structures. Having that much enlightened understanding in one space just causes kooky stuff to happen. And maybe you talk about the implosion of Yamaja Station. It's also weird because it took me a while to remember that the J in Yamaja is actually pronounced, as opposed to it being like Yamaha Station. It is named after, I think, an Igbo river god, some West African deity, and I just kind of thought that was interesting.
So after the squids, we have the snow dogs, who are our cryogenic specialists. They explore the regions around the polar caps. With the advent of global warming, unfortunately, the syndicate has massively reduced their budget, much to their frustration. But I mean, it's a tragedy, but it is kind of funny that, there's not a lot of stuff to explore there at the poles anymore, you guys. So
well, to me, the big thing was, one, Technocracy Reloaded was a little bit of a disappointment for me. It didn't add a huge amount, unless you wanted to talk about having a baby within the technocracy. But
what forms do you have to fill out for that?
Yeah. Agent's Dossier, though, or Operative's Dossier, was wildly fun. And it just has this section where it's like, oh yeah, the Antarctic is full of extra dimensional portals, and the art to it is just like this dinosaur appearing on an ice shelf and people being like, ah, as like tentacles come out of another one. I'm like, that's my technocracy. So to me, I think this is one of those things where the syndicate says you don't need as much money until they realize the weird things that are waking up. The other thing is, as there's a scramble to find a Northwest Passage, a way to use the Arctic to navigate now that there are periods and times and places where it is ice free, suddenly they're like, no, you don't want to go there. It has a gauntlet rating of 2, which is lower than the gauntlet in the wilderness in Sorcerer's Crusade. This is so far away that there are weird things that you want to deal with. So suddenly we have to deal with megalodons and giant Arctic sharks and weird manta ray creatures that are 60 feet across or something like that. And suddenly they are much more important because they're the only ones that remember it. The other thing that I thought was kind of interesting is in Dead Magic, I think it's Dead Magic 2, Secrets and Survivors, we get the idea that there's a lot happening in the Arctic. Again, that the gauntlet is thin. There are strange things there. It is a place where certain types of entities can cross over easily from the penumbra. And to me, the snow dogs are the specialists for that. That a Yeti wanders into a major city and they suddenly have to deal with it, or one of the flesh imitators that has a very, very long Inupiaq name that I can't remember off the top of my head. But to me, the fact that people are now stepping into the Arctic in a way that they hadn't before puts these people more to the fore. So I think this is an interesting story of the Syndicate's hubris, as much as I love my boys.
It also serves to mirror the previous issue that the Victorian era Void Engineers had with the Lightkeepers, who didn't see them being useful, and we see how that turned out. Next up, we have the Weed Whackers. The official name is the Hydrothermal Botanical Mosaic Analysts. The Weed Whackers work hand in hand with the progenitors to explore the rainforests that remain here on Earth. Recently, they have found resistance against further intrusion in the Amazon.
We get the idea in werewolf that kind of the Amazon has a special relationship with Gaia and the worm, that there are a lot of weird things that come out of it. We have the drowned legacies within vampire, which seem kind of interesting, and I wish we had gotten a book on it. I think this is one of those weird cases where they strike me as kind of the Uktena of the technocracy to some extent, where they're like, we know what's in here and we know how to keep it away. That's a weird case where they have this kind of specialized knowledge that could be kind of used in just about any game.
Yeah, the werewolves and the worm love to fight over the Amazon. Something about it being the heart of Gaia, but that's definitely all superstitious nonsense, and the weed whackers don't have to pay any attention to any of that, certainly.
Especially when some of them are turned into drones by the Weaver or something like that. And what does it mean to have an enlightened Bane? That seems like it would be a bad thing. Or a Bane-like spirit.
Next up, we have the inaccessible high elevation exploration teams, IHEAT, or cliffhangers. They have the duty to catalog the mountainous regions of the world, especially the mountaintops. And you got to keep these guys funded because otherwise you get Shangri-La. Do you want to have Shangri-La? Because that is how you get Shangri-La. They got to keep them away from here. We don't need some enlightened village that shows up every 100 years, takes your white savior in, teaches him how to be the best karate master, sends him back to the city. That's not what we're about. Close those doors.
I like the Shangri-La Burners being their nickname or something like that. And in the same way that you can go into a house and it might have an infestation of cockroaches or squirrels or something like that. They're like, they go to a mountain peak and like, damn it, there's another Akashic stupa. And they have to go like shoo them all out before they can finish their mapping exercise. Like another 7-century-year-old master up there. How many could there be?
I think the official term is Shangri-La.
Yes. I also like the idea that the mountainous nature makes this group inadvertently skilled with dealing with high umbral spires. To be like in the weird case where you actually have to climb it, that they're like, no, we know how to do this. This would also be the group that might be familiar with the points where Mount Meru or any number of mythical mountains arrive. They know where Olympus is, and they're the ones who have the control within governments to be like, no, you can't go over here. El Capitan is popular and done to keep people from going this other route in Yosemite or something like that. Or you take this particular path off Everest because if you take a different one, you suddenly find yourself in Mount Kof or something like that.
You're on the plateau of Ling.
That would be awkward.
You don't want to get there.
This is the opposite of climbing. Everything's very flat. What for the plateau term? But I have no idea what Lang actually looks like. See Bryce and mine episode on the geography of Cthulhu for more information on that.
Going the opposite direction, we have the Subterranean Exploration Corps, or groundhogs. The groundhogs explore caverns and tunnels beneath the earth, hoping to find a way into the hollow earth spoken of by some sons of ether, and once there, destroy it, because that place does not fit the consensus. There cannot be a giant underground cavernous location full of lost worlds and dinosaurs. No.
And this to me is either one of those groups that is very ripe for infiltration from Entropy or the Worm. We get the idea that Black Spiral Dancer hives, which are werewolves who have fallen to the Worm, tend to build their lairs deep within the earth in tainted and terrible places. I could see them as, again, taking on the role of sealing that. They're your information specialists. They're the one person within the group that has a lot of information around that. We have the idea that there are certain other subterranean species, especially within werewolf, the Vajunka, these giant-mouthed, eyeless, weird creatures that no one's quite entirely sure, but I could also see them as being important when your group stumbles upon, oh, we found an underground city and it keeps going clear into the underworld and somehow clear into the high umbra. And they're the ones who have the skills and expertise to kind of map that area. We also get the idea that if you kind of go down far enough, you can go into the hollow earth and go past and wind up on Jupiter. They're probably very important in making sure that like spelunkers don't accidentally the outer planets.
That would be awkward.
Yeah. Like, you're in a gas giant. Your health insurance doesn't work here, buddy.
Next up, we have the Incursion Quantitative Analysis Team, ICAT, or Fringers. These specialists research areas where the dimensional anomaly has breached into reality, including its effects on the local wildlife, which is not exactly the same as the Southern Reach books. The anomaly there has an unknown cause. The anomaly here has a known cause, namely too many umbral nukes. But yeah, it's the Southern Reach guys.
Yeah, Jeff Vandermeer novel, Annihilation, Authority, and Acceptance, I think.
Yeah.
I found the movie pretty good. I found the book very enjoyable, and I'll include links to both in the show notes.
Yeah, the books are fantastic. The movie has Oscar Isaacs.
I think the movie was, yeah.
It's fine. It's not as good as the book, but it's a weird book. I don't know how you'd make that book into a movie.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's a different thing, and to compare the two is doing a disservice, I would think, to both. But yeah, this is the thing, the idea that we get that the dimensional anomaly kind of had shards that fell off of it. We never really get much information about this in anything else, but it gives you the idea that maybe you have a game where a reality zone is in flux and you're charged with terranorming it. Maybe the part of the terranorming process causes a certain amount of local gauntlet to kind of be snipped off and to create these weird technocratic versions of sendings, which are causing problems. So you have terranormed an entire neighborhood, but there's this one block that's a little bit weird. There's an abandoned house where kind of strange umble creatures have been coming out of it, and this is the group that needs to go and investigate.
The creatures are not coming out of the house. The creature is the house.
The house. Yep. Mega Mimic.
Dianea House. It was an old creepypasta from about 30 years ago at this point. Strongly recommended. It was really well written and well told. Anyway, finally, that brings us to our last group, the Maintenance and Custodial Division, known as Scruffies. Perhaps the most vital group. MNC is dedicated to maintaining the bases that the Earth Frontier Division manages to establish in these hostile territories. And now I really want to know how sanitatiomancy works, because that sounds awesome.
I mean, all you need is matter 3 to be able to safely combine the cleaning power of ammonia with the cleaning power of bleach.
That'll do it.
Yep. Big heal.
That'll clean anything right up.
And I think that's interesting that you could have characters like that were kind of specialist with maintaining these things, and that's your globe hopping campaign where you have this like bureaucratic comedy where you're like, there's your problem, you got gremlins again. It's like, darn it. And you're just kind of this like elite task force that goes from place to place. Or alternatively, you're a retired scruffy that does the same thing for like chantries on a like ad hoc basis where it's like, oh no, I will take care of this paradox spirit, but it's going to cost you. So I like the idea of people that have in some way retired from their factions, then kind of offer their abilities on a one-off basis, the consulting detectives, as it were, of the Ascension War.
My dad does that. Not with magic.
Oh, okay. I'm like buried
as far as I
there.
know.
The next methodology we're going to talk about is the NSC, the Neutralization Specialist Corps. The Interface Defense Corps, these are operatives that deal with threats from the near universe, which is to say the near Umbra, generally the Penumbra, that have somehow bypassed the BCD, the Border Corps Division. They also monitor portals constructed by reality deviants into the different Umbrae. And I like these because this is the group with the maps. They are the ones that have the maps that say there be dragons, except in this case it says hole into the near dreaming or goes directly to the Vulgate. In my conception of the Umbra, these are the groups that know what major buildings have endpoints that if you go deep enough into their bowels, immediately terminate within the Fortress of Government or into the Bibliotheca Exandronica or something like that. They're the ones that know the weird ways to get there. And one of the things the Void Engineers has always been pretty good at is appearing that they are towing the technocracy party line, but really keeping the interesting stuff on the down low.
Yeah, I can also see these guys being the antagonists of another game. So if you were playing Werewolf and some guys show up in suits who want to shut down your Glasswalker cairn because, oh hey, that spirit just we're not cool with that guy living in this building anymore. Rent control be damned. We gotta kick him out.
Rent control be damned. That needs to be the title of this for the Storyteller Vault.
These are the people who will rezone your freehold in your changeling game. They won't come at you, with cold iron bullets or anything, but they will come at you with the deafening power of bureaucracy.
These, to me, is also the group that wages a subtle war with the Nefandi, who also understand the importance of controlling property and bureaucracy. And I could see them, these are the two groups that clash at every township meeting over whether or not a vacant lot should be rezoned R1 residential or C1 commercial or something like that. The Nefandi are trying to finish their master pentacle, where the Interface Defense Corps is just like, no, we can strengthen the gauntlet by 4% if we get this redone as a elementary school. Hot bureaucratic action.
It's a mixed use park area. They come to a compromise.
The next group is the Spectrum Neutralization Division. The SND deals with incursions from the underworld, working closely with the Necronauts of the Pan-Dimensional Core. They monitor atrocities and minimize the damage invading entities deal to the population. This group is interesting in that this is the group that understands the timetable of the Midnight Express. They have an idea of what the far shores are. They know what the Dark Kingdoms are, and they could matter-of-factly have a weird office conversation where they're talking about, the Skeletal Lord, or as we like to call him, Mr. Bonyhands, is getting real uppity about being a manifestation of pestilence. And it's like, wasn't coronavirus enough for him? He really thinks he's up and coming, but the smiling Lord has been making moves. Like, to me, this is a pretty fascinating way of kind of squaring the technocracy's bureaucracy with possibly the hierarchy. And it's the one time you can go, well, if you think our bureaucracy is bad. This is also the group that's probably going to have the weirdest things in the closet. They're like, oh yeah, we got some Mayan death whistles. We know how to deal with these things. Or when a bar guest escapes or something like that. In my head for a while, ghosts was always something that I thought the Syndicate dealt with when I was a little kid reading 2E, but I'm glad in Revised it clearly came here.
They also keep ghosts from being too sad at living people in any given area, which is a tremendous issue for the living. They'll be sad directly at you. It won't affect you in any way, but they'll be there being sad on the other side of the gauntlet.
A kind of projectile sadden sometimes, in some cases. I also like the notion that they have the ability to see necropoli and they just don't like them. They're kind of like the NIMBY version of it.
Nobody likes necropoli, not even the race that live there. They just live there because there's nowhere else to go.
Yeah, no, the alternative is they turn into specters, which I assume they like even less. I feel like getting in the face with a maelstrom is a good way to get harrowing up your ass, but...
Point.
Yeah. The NSC also contains the Descartes Institute of Mental Health, which has one of my favorite quotes about it in 2E, where Tychoides is like, mental health is unimportant, we will continue exploring. And then it has a quote from Tychoides after contact with a Nexus crawler or something like that, where it's just like, and then their quote after that, we understand the importance of quality mental health and maintaining the integrity of the operations of the Void Engineers. So, formerly located at the COP. Now, in M20, the COP is back, but it's not a Dyson sphere, it's not around a distant star, it just kind of seems to be a big space base orbiting Earth that just kind of monitors stuff, and that's fine.
The COP is back, now in POG form.
Behold, the ultimate POG. The Descartes Institute kind of does three different things. One, this is the group that to me would be able to track down a mimetic virus that had crossed over. That if something from the Umbra or from a weird space were carried in thought or writing or some other media, they would kind of be the group that would do the investigation as opposed to the NWO who's just like, that's right, something weird came over, burn all the books and make sure everyone watches at least 4 hours of Sesame Street today. And you're like, okay, that's one way to deal with it. The other thing is, this is the group that is responsible for deprogramming, removing kind of NWO brainwashing from Void Engineer members so they can do their job correctly. The other thing is, I like the idea of being a field psychiatrist, that you're the group or you get to play a character that is just dealing with other people. They have not seen the horrors themselves necessarily, but they have seen what the horrors can do. And I think in a very real, actionable way, that would be a way to bring them into a game. I always kind of wish there were a system. I feel like the Technocracy would be a group that was unusually good at dealing with the stresses of encountering the supernatural in a way that maybe other people didn't have. And I kind of wish there were a system for that. So what do you think about the Descartes Institute of Mental Health?
You're missing a fourth leg of their remit there. They're the ones who prepare the other members of the Void Engineers to go out and see these horrible things. They're the ones who build up these strong mental constructs that the otherworldly beings and the anti-memes from beyond the stars have to break down to affect the Void Engineers. So they have a bit of preventative medicine as well, which is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
But we have to move it to the metric system. So.
A hectare of prevention is worth a furlong of cure. I think that's metric. Yeah. Don't quote me.
A dram of prevention is worth a hogshead of cure. Yeah. And the last group is the Enforcement Training and Conditioning Agency. ETCA has the task of socially conditioning void engineers who will be traveling into the universe to fight with monsters, allegedly giving them mental buffers. Again, this is the thing that bypasses the NWO, allowing the void engineers more freedom from control than other conventions. This was kind of introduced in Revised. The Descartes Institute did that work in 2nd edition. Again, this is more focused on traveling into the universe and other places. To me, this could also be a group that is in charge of cramming, where it's like, okay, you need to go into ensemble space and climb the Babylonian Spire. You need these 7 books sleep taught to you within the next 4 days, or you won't be able to navigate the court of Ashurbanipal. So again, this is a group kind of like the Spectral Neutralization Division that probably has a really weird library and probably is really into prog rock as a guess.
The Rusty's Venture of the technocracy.
Yeah, the robot bones.
Our next methodology is the pan-dimensional core, which comprises 2 sub-methodologies. The cybernauts, who travel the digital web trying to wrestle it back from the virtual adept. In the wake of the rise of the extraordinary citizen through the internet, their task has become much more difficult.
There are other groups within the PDC, but again, we're kind of skipping them because they're all space oriented. And just as you said earlier, I just like the idea of like, we have extraordinary citizens. Do you want extraordinary citizens? Because this is how you get them. Take that stuff down from Reddit.
Oh God, I don't want anybody to be a Redomancer.
Yeah.
The second group within the pan-dimensional core are the chrononauts, who travel through time, seeking to categorize its anomalies and navigate its course. Since their work is highly paradox prone, they have to work with absolute precision and care. Many joke that only madmen are fit to join the chrononaut.
I feel like their motto is something like, Chrononauts, it doesn't not work. Because one thing that they've been very good at is kind of saying, time travel may work. It doesn't work how you think it is, and it is very messy. Until you get to M20, where you just do it with time 3. And you're like,
just time 3, boom, you're there. Yeah.
But even within the PDC, the Pan-Dimensional Core, there are these 2 other groups that kind of focus on things that can be on the more mundane side. This is the case where the cybernauts probably have the huskiest of Marines in terms of things. They're keyboard slingers, I feel, don't skip out on a lot of Doritos and something being like, suit me up for combat, sir. And it's just like the comic book guy from The Simpsons or something like that.
That's all part of their practices and their foci.
Doritos and Mountain Dew. That's
yeah.
We understand them. We're inside of their heads. And we kind of have the idea within Mage of the Great Race to format, or probably in the case of M20 and Revised, to reformat the digital web after its collapse. And this to me is an interesting group because they are probably frequently interfacing directly with frenemies throughout the Ascension War. This strikes me as a group that's like, yeah, you can promote sleepers to do all this cool stuff on the web, but this is the mimetic entity that the Nefandi have produced that you're unleashing in the process. Do you want Rocco's Basilisk? Because this is how you get Rocco's Basilisk. And kind of the last group that we have is research and execution. They make the railguns, they make the power suits, they make the big, strong things. They generally are deployed along with the unit using their stuff. To me, this is kind of the apex example of someone with 10 points in requisitions or something like that, where they're always appropriately outfitted. Generally unsung heroes within the group. They don't like the idea of development within their name because they're like, we're about doing stuff. Because development can take so long. You can come up with something new and use it in the field now. These are suggested as being the elite of the elite. These are the most capable soldiers, the most nimble minds, the most skilled scientists, whether it be in the lab or in the field, and they're out there doing stuff.
The most Guyver of all MacGyvers.
10 points in Guyver on the MacGyvers today. If you're interested in the more space marine part, again, Revised Convention Book Void Engineers goes into the near orbit picket group, the biospheric space garrison, the mirror world patrol, the combat space patrol, and Delta teams, where there used to be 5, but now there's 4. I hope that's just a mathematical error that like someone actually, when it says like, don't hit submit again or don't hit refresh on this page, they accidentally did that and that like copied an entire Delta Force team.
Oh, I thought it was because it's Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Delta teams.
No one wants to be Epsilon team. That's
no
just
one
kind of
no
one wants to be Epsilon. Delta shift. And now the question is, now that we've walked through it, if we're having our Earth-based game, what are kind of the themes that we can explore? And to me, kind of 3 popped out at me, or 4. One was the nearby strange. The Void Engineers bring a toolbox of exploration and discovery that is multidisciplinary. When strange things happen down your street, the Void Engineers can eventually show up. This is territory that can also be covered by the New World Order or the Syndicate in an urban area, and there may be a race to investigate and understand before one of those two groups just says, we don't have time for this, we need to nuke it. So this is an interesting way where if you're playing a tradition game, you need to figure it out or deal with something before the Void Engineers have to call in someone above them that just levels that city block or destroys that homeless encampment or buries that church or paves over that graveyard or whatever you think the thing that is causing the Union problems, but that you think can be used usefully for your chantry or whatever is being investigated. They're the ones that they're going to be the first line to investigate the weird thing that's happening with your node or your shallowing that's gone awry or a juncture that is occurring that is causing problems. Danubrian milkweed seems to have arrived in a vacant lot in your city and is taking the form of the middle book of the Hunger Games series. As it multiplies, it spreads across bookshelves within the city. How did it get there, and how is the group going to track it down? To me, the Void Engineers get to do some kooky stuff that to them makes absolute sense. And one of the fun things about Mage is saying ridiculous things like, we need to track down 10,000 missing copies of Catching Fire or the city is destroyed. I think that was the middle novel of the Hunger Games series. I never read any of it.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah.
I've never read a Hunger Games novel in my life.
My spouse says that we should start one of those little like curbside take a book, leave a book that for me would just consist of 40 copies of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius and then the middle Hunger Games novel, just to kind of keep it spicy.
Just one copy.
Yeah. Any thoughts on the Nearby Strange?
Yeah, so in addition to what you said, which was fantastic, the Void Engineers, by their very existence in an area, can attract and can cause the Nearby Strange to pop up just because of, their esoteric methods that they use to put down that sad ghost over on that block. Well, that could have some harmonic resonance that causes the fire spirit that was kept in check over here to pop back up. It's kind of, a game of cosmic whack-a-mole where they can never truly win because their own methods of dealing with the problem cause the next problem.
And I like the idea that this how we get our tradition or non-aligned mates involved, where it's like, this escaped, we would love to get it back because we spent a lot of time figuring out how to get this particular tulpa to evolve in such a way that it didn't just eat mortals. And I have a research grant contingent on that, but if you can get it back to me, I'll do you a solid or something like that. Whereas the NWO or the Syndicate will just be like, let's kill it.
Yep. Just erase that from reality.
Yep,
no
that's what depleted uranium rounds solve a lot of problems. The next kind of thread that the Void Engineers brought to me is kind of what I call an anthropologist on Mars, that they are the ones who have spent so much time out there in a weird world that they are confused by the mundane. That it's like, yes, I've spent so much time with Eunosian baboons that I understand their notion of hierarchy. I don't understand what's happening in my office, or I don't understand local politics. They're kind of the kooky out there character that you can introduce to kind of shed new light on something. Where a traditionalist says that they're in a war for reality, and they're the kind of person that goes, that's cute. I've been to 17 different planets. I'm
across 3 different Everett volumes.
Yes. Or like, yes, I'm glad that you're trying to clean up this local park. I prevented an invasion of autopolitans from taking over Autothonia. This is quaint. So I think they do a great job of showing, there is completely different scales, and what is normal is kind of entirely an idea of perspective. They can serve as your data character or your Spock character. They have spent so much time in a deep space realm or exploring the Amazon that they're like, this is a concern. I was thrilled that I was able to wake up this morning and had running water, that I didn't have to filter
my
out
legs work the same way as when I went to sleep.
Yeah.
Something like that, yeah. If you're going to have a character like that, though, in your chronicle, you really want to have at least one scene where they can draw on their esoteric knowledge to show that, yeah, they don't really fit in, and they don't really fit in for a good reason, but they do bring something to the table that isn't just, comedic relief.
The next theme I had was the idea that the Earth is not yet explored. We frequently talk about the world of darkness as if it's this uniform, slightly grungy, kind of cold or a little bit too hot urban landscape. But that is not the case at all. We have Blood Dim Tide, which is just like, the oceans are weird. Most of humanity consists of a small circle drawn in Southeast Asia with a diameter of a couple thousand miles. And Russia is a big place. Canada is a big place. The Amazon is very hard to explore. The Sahara is very large. There are many areas of the world where a couple miles away from the city square, it is still primeval wilderness or something close to. In the world of darkness, we have all sorts of weird things to be concerned about. And I think the Void Engineers are a persistent reminder that your characters may be dealing with the urban jungle, but there's an actual jungle out there that may just be just as dangerous if they don't know what they're doing, especially in a world where weird things lurk around every corner.
In addition to that, even if you're just maintaining your chronicle within the city, there are predators within that city, especially in the world of darkness. There's nests of vampires, there's cairns of werewolves. If you go down into the sewers, you're likely to find 3 or 4 different types of vampire. And who are you going to call to take those nests of vampires out when they start eating your citizens? Well, the Void Engineers, it's their job. They go into the strange places, they put on their little gas mask and their super suit, and they head down to the sewer and they take out that Nosferatu nest.
I don't know about you. I'd feel a lot more comfortable going into just about any sewer if I knew I had access to an Allenson hard suit. But yeah.
I think that I'd feel better going into my bathroom at home if I had access to an Allen. It's come on, it's fantastic.
I will take 8 points of armor. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Am I going to need it? No. But if I do, I'll be happy to have it.
Yeah. And one thing Bryce brings up is the Void Engineers are a convenient way if you want to just kind of collapse the technocracy into a much simpler organization. Like, no, we're not going to bring up the cleaners within the syndicate, and we're not going to bring up the enforcers, and we're not going to bring up the black suits. If you want to keep your technocracy weird, focusing on the Void Engineers as kind of the general response force, I think is a great idea. The last one I kind of had was the idea of spirit technology. So I talked with Hal Case about what would werewolf hypertech look like. The Void Engineers understand spirit and dimensional science in a way that few people do. Many conventions may not be able to note that an umbrood or a spirit or something weird is even involved, and the Void Engineers are constantly going to be on guard for that. So, for instance, you may have the Turing Police, a name I just kind of took from Neuromancer, which is a book that I like seemingly more than most people, that in a group that investigates claims of artificial intelligence, because the burgeoning field of AI is a great opportunity for Umbrood to suddenly appear within reality. You're like, oh, you've got this box that can answer just about any question. Is that a Jinn? Is that an oracle from the High Umbra? If you don't have access to dimensional science, you're probably not going to be able to understand it. It could be a spirit of tool use, a gremlin, a malicious entity from the Demon City. I like the idea that someone from the Void Engineers, just kind of as good hygiene, tends to accompany groups just in case. This is the group that is disproportionately likely, probably again along with the NWO, to have some sort of urban response, to have folklorists, to have people that understand the area, that have done the research. It might be largely academic, and this is where a tradition group needs to come in to supplement it. But this is the one group within the technocracy that may have capital F fetishes and understand how to use them and have that secret vault of them for maybe those times where we're going into ensemble or biospheric space and hypertech doesn't work too well.
Well, one of 2 groups. You also have the Special Project Division. They definitely have fetishes.
SPD. It's kind of weird. It's like they just at this point 25 years ago, and everyone's still like, so they still send in the checks.
They still send in the checks. Part. That's all we care about. We don't ask questions. They don't give us answers. They will have folklorists, which is not the same thing as believers. Traditions will be believers in the folklore. These will be people who studied 7 books needed to pass through the test of Ashurbanipal. They don't believe that this is a god. They just believe that they may believe that it is a very powerful extra-dimensional entity, and this is how you talk to it if you don't want it to tear you in half, which is functionally the same, but paradigmatically it's completely different.
I see a member of the Void Engineer, a folklorist in the Void Engineer, and a hermetic having that meet cute hate thing where it's like, I can't quit you. And the narcissism of minor differences go over and they smooch at the end. But yeah, not a lot of times where you can do that between a technic and a member of the Order of Hermes. Do you have any feel of what the mood of a Earthbound Void Engineer game could be?
It should be one of wonder at the mundane, which is to say, not everything needs to be some big, huge monster from beyond the world. There's enough here to keep us busy for the rest of our natural lives. Not to go back to the Lightbringers, but we don't need to go looking out there for problems. We got problems at home.
Yeah. The big thing that comes out to me is the idea of the uncanny and the idea of vastness that maybe you have done your deployment and you've been to Yamahaja Station or you've been to the COP, and now you're back and you understand truly how weird the world around you is. You understand those dangers. And to me, it's also an interesting meditation on hubris that you're like, space is so, but you have all these defense systems when you go into it. You're on a void ship, you have space marines. But when you're just going into the Amazon to collect fungus and come upon a black spiral dancer hive, you don't have the space marines. So it's one of those things like people think trucks are dangerous to drive around, so people drive safely around them, so it's safer to drive around trucks, where people kind of overcompensate for it. So I think that's an interesting angle of hubris that can kind of come in to be like, we've been able to deal with this, and this. We were able to build a Dyson sphere, or at least co-opt one, but you can't handle this weird thing, this weird spiritual infestation that is occurring because the cemetery was never quite renovated correctly or exists at the kind of merger of two ley lines. The other thing to me that really comes across is the idea of technocratic ubiquity. So if you ask people who's in the technocratic union, you kind of get a bunch of stereotypical answers. You get cyborgs, you get black hats, you get money men, and so on. But the void engineers kind of fill everywhere else. Your characters go on a sacred spiritual journey to find Shangri-La, and they already find a snow dog there. That's like, nope, we closed that portal 2 weeks ago. Good luck. Here's some rations. Hope you can make it back.
I think that the opposite is also true. Technocratic non-ubiquity, because these people go to places where, reality there is paying lip service to the technocratic paradigm, but this is the edge where the cases lie. This is where all the edge cases come into reality. So we're in the Amazon, or we're in, we're a mile underground in these crazy tunnels that are leading us to the hollow earth. Sure, technically everything still works according to the rules, but does it really? Shouldn't that pressure be crushing us into little teeny tiny cubes at this point? The technocratic reality is there, but barely, and you're the one stapling it to the wall and keeping it from falling down and just disappearing.
Yeah, the fact that one group is responsible for 98% of the planet kind of shows you maybe how thin the veneer of the technocracy truly is. Wherever they have to go, they're notionally prepared. Any other thoughts about the technocracy? Maybe how you can introduce them into a traditions game or a disparate game or something like that, some roles that they could have, or kind of anything that we didn't mention so far.
So the Void Engineers have long been the one convention that players of the game, readers of the game, see as the most sympathetic to the traditionalists, the ones that are, for years and years and years, there was talk, they're going to defect from the technocracy, the NWO or the Syndicate, or someone will get enough power to kick the Void Engineers out. They're leaving. And the convention book made a very strong point right at the beginning, saying, we're not going anywhere. We like it here. We are technocrats. But that doesn't negate the fact that the other groups see them as approachable or as fellow travelers in the strange. So, if you have another group that needs to talk to somebody about a problem that is too big for them to handle with their means and methodologies and resources, they might be able to reach out to their friendly neighbor Void Engineer and say, hey, Spider-Man, we have a pattern spider over here that's going nuts. Can you maybe help us out, do us a solid real fast, and we'll stop the weekly mana sacrifices or whatever we're doing that you don't like? They seem to be the group that is most likely to have contact with outside groups that are not, fellow technocrats, that aren't just, I saw that guy and I shot him. And two, that the outside group would feel comfortable approaching it.
And to some extent, if you wanted to play against type, that could be a cat's paw. That could be something you use to lure in traditionalists before the hammer of black suits or hit marks kind of comes down. But yeah, I agree with Bryce. This is kind of the one where on outside of formal channels, that least likely to kind of draw pistols. We make mention that when they run into each other in the Umbra, they are less likely to cause issues because you probably share more with the traditionalist than you share more with the actual threat in the form of a Nefandus or a Marauder or something like that. So why make enemies needlessly?
That being said, they're also a great recruitment tool for the technocracy. If you're a void engineer and you're approached by a group of virtual adepts who say, "Hey, we have a huge problem." This is a great way to make friends and influence people and slowly draw them into your paradigm a little bit tighter until they realize, "Oh, hey, wait a minute. This traditional nonsense, this whole data wants to be free. Well, that's how we got into this mess in the first place. That's how that mimetic virus escaped and, infected my third grade class or whatever. Information doesn't may want to be free, but I don't want it to be free anymore. I'm going to join the technocracy." The Void Engineers had it right all along.
It's one of those things where, what is it? Anyone who's not a liberal in youth is hard-hearted, and anyone who's not a conservative in their dotage is hard-headed. That like anyone who is not a traditionalist in their youth has no sense of wonder, and anyone who's not a member of the technocracy in their old age has fallen to hubris or insanity.
Has no sense of danger.
Yeah. So again, not necessarily true, but you could certainly see that regular pipeline. In addition to that, we got a few listener questions, and Bryce took the time to kind of research these answers. So first one, space aeronautics conspiracies go hand in hand with accounts of cryptids and weird phenomenon. How does the convention handle these? What methodology deals most with amalgams on the ground?
As we mentioned earlier, the EDF has a ton of nearly G.I. Joe level specialists to cover land, air, sea, sewer, mountain, cavern, jungle, desert, whatever you got. If there's a biome, there's an EDF member who specializes in defending it.
Yeah, EFD, right? Earth Frontier Division.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
The other one to me is the Neutralization Specialist Corps. And I like the idea that they have a monitoring network for cryptids, where they're like, okay, the Loveland Frog has graduated from scaring kids in the back seats of cars that make out point to eating pets. We need to intercede, or something like that. Something kind of like the back room within Cabin in the Woods or something, where they're keeping track of like 30 weird ones, and they have to go on r/creepypasta commonly to see if these are any actually informed by what is happening on the earthly side.
They actually post to r/creepypasta to counter the harsher posters there who are making these threats bigger. They post the cutesy creepypastas.
Got it.
Kind of bring them back down to size.
Got it. Slender Man, but they make out at the end. In Convention Book Void Engineers on page 24, there's a mention of something called a TEF project. While we don't get told what TEF stands for, it seems like the project revolves around exchanging points in time. What potential plot points do you think could come from this? So what's a TEF point?
I made up my answer. The Temporal Everett Field Project was used to scry into the future from 1989 to 1999. It's also mentioned later on page 59 of Convention Book Void Engineer Revised, and send information from one point in time to another. The researchers in 1989 who went missing in action while attempting to communicate with the far future year of 1999 did so because they were purely coincidentally looking into the year of the dimensional anomaly, which, the start of the anomaly of the Avatar storm, that little thing. Because this was a period of such massive metaplot nonsense, they did not survive contact. R.I.P. Yardley and Zimmerman, gone too soon by literally exactly 10 years.
So your statement is TEF is Temporal Everett Field.
Yes.
Nice. I like it. And the next question we get is, one thing that is mentioned several times throughout the Convention Book Void Engineers is Everett volumes. EVs are effectively alternate realities timelines. It's stated that prime reality, the reality in which the core World of Darkness universe appears to be set in, contains a unique universal property compared to these other realities. Specifically, it states that object matter can be moved between other EVs. Also, objects and matter can be moved from the prime reality and moved to alternate EVs. However, nothing from another reality can come back. I guess, what do you think about Everett volumes? My two things on this are, one, I didn't realize it at the time, but I always interpreted Everett volumes as the mirror zone, but in actuality, as it's kind of actually defined, it covers all zones. That it covers the dreaming as well, and suggests that there are other strange things. We get a bunch of rotes that allow us to move to them. The nature of the mirror zone and many of the zones in Mage very much changes between editions. Like in M20, the mirror zone is kind of described as a place for when a storyteller thinks a character needs a moment of existential exploration, whereas in Revised, it's like, there's psychic dinosaurs there, and they're trying to break into the Tower of Babylon, and we need to stop them. And you're like, well, that's an adventure again. So street level. So the Everett volumes are kind of notable. One of the key things that we get is not the idea that those realities are just as legit. WAD doesn't really exist in a true multiverse. You can take the Fractured Cosmos interpretation where each line is kind of a different beast. But one of the things I like about the science fiction that especially we get with the technocracy is everything kind of points back to Earth. There's really no point where it gets out there and stays there unless your table makes that choice. It's not kind of what the game tells you to do. What do you think about Everett volumes?
I think if you want to play a mage game of sliders, you can go ahead and you can do that. That's what Everett volumes are there for.
Hmm.
I personally don't want to play that game, but if that's the fun that you want to have at your table, enjoy yourselves.
Why don't you want to play that game? Like, do you think it defeats, it's not very magey, or just something about that style of game that you're not interested in?
I think it's very second edition Meiji. I prefer the more down to earth games. So yeah, okay, if you want to have invaders from an alternate reality where, I don't know, dinosaurs rule the earth and they're coming here to, flee their saurian overlords or whatever, that's one thing. But if you want to play, like I said, a sliders game where you go to different alternate reality every session, there's other games out there, guys. Play
Hmm.
play those other games. They're for that.
Yeah. Torg. And one of the things to me about all of them is the intrusion should always feel off or wrong. They may have this kind of existential siren song to them, like I want to go to this reality that's different or better, but like it probably shouldn't work out in the end. Kind of like the idea of the mirror zone is it's not prime reality. It's not what is real. You will suffer disembodiment there in the fullness of time. And I could see a game where you're trying to recover someone from that who has already been ephemeralized and turned into a spirit. But yeah, if you want to have the weird opportunity to talk about the mechanocracy or something like that, or some weird alternate reality bit that kind of got transferred in a grand experiment that went haywire, heck yeah.
I do like the idea of bleed over zones where an alternate reality is not necessarily invading, but the Berenstein Bears kind of
Ah,
kind
the
of thing.
Mandela effect.
Yeah.
I like the idea of that being, instead of necessarily tied specifically to a marauder, that for whatever reason, this area kind of has its own quiet bubble that we're not quite sure about. For whatever reason, all the dollars are blue and have different presidents on them. And you kind of have to investigate why that's here and why that's spreading.
That's a good use of Everett volumes. I prefer that to just, trekking through the multiverse.
And last question, do you foresee the Void engineers working across various timelines cooperatively, or would there be a conflict with other iterations of the VEs for various knowledges and resources within alternate realities? This immediately makes me think of the Marvel continuities Council of Reed Richards or something like that, where every Void engineer from every reality works together to do it, or maybe they form their own TVA, Temporal Variance Authority, which I think probably was best known from the TV series Loki, or something like that, that there is this extra temporal agency that allows them to coordinate across. I kind of like the idea that that doesn't exist, because there are so many realities where the technocracy doesn't turn out the way we want, where the machine does take over, or reality is taken over because one of the great old ones returns or something like that. They try and do this, but the number of realities that can support it just kind of keep winking out of existence, or collapsing, or being destroyed, or falling to the Yama Kings, or Kane returns or something like that. And this kind of is the only one. And
Kane never left.
yeah,
It's always been a blood-soaked world.
yeah, we're still essentially in the first city or something like that. The deluge never occurs. I like that as kind of a thing that points back. Or if you do want to have this line, every time they reach out, something bad happens. It causes that technological incursion to occur where biomechanical things start kind of intruding in when technology kind of made this other direction. But I very much like the theme that they're on their own.
I do like your idea that every time somebody tries to form a council of void engineers in that reality, that is what causes that reality to fail. So yeah, we reached out to all the other void engineers in all the other realities, and the first one that answered our call was from the Borg Collective or
Yeah.
whatever. And now we're all part of that universe's autochthоnia. Oops.
And that universe has been alerted to our existence, and they're trying to track down the quantum signature to come here to spread the gospel of the machine further, or what have you. And it just kind of backfires. But yeah, I don't. One thing Mage kind of tries to reinforce is there's no one coming to save us. And that is where the power of the game comes from. And to me, that is also where the terror of the game comes from. But that's just me.
Yeah, I mean, by definition, anybody from a deviant reality is a reality deviant. We don't trust those guys.
Reasonable. Especially, I do like the idea that a traditionalist group tries to do the same thing. They're like, hey, we found a reality where the Hermetics are ascendant. We want to find information from them. And then the technocracy is like, no, you don't. And everyone's like, you're just bothered that you didn't win here. And then quickly you find out how terrible it is to actually be a mortal living in the city of Pymander with mad demigods kind of moving about unhindered by paradox.
Yeah, no thanks.
Yeah.
Hard pass.
Any final thoughts on the earthly part of the Void Engineer? Did this episode kind of go how you wanted it to?
I think so, yeah. I got to make my dumb little points, and you made them sound smart. So thank you.
I did. You warned me years ago when we first started doing episodes that you're like, no. Your outlines are just going to get longer and more detailed. I'm like, nah, I've been doing this for 5 years. And yeah, Bryce and I are looking at 7 pages of words in front of us. So yeah, you really called that one. Anything you want to bring our attention to in the world of Darker Days, or anything that's happening in any of your other projects?
We are starting a series this year of live plays, actual plays, where we will be selecting a horror themed game or a game with horror themes. We will be spending an episode creating characters, an episode going over the rules, an episode playing the game in question. So look forward to that.
And that, I assume, is at darker-days or
darker-days.org. And we'll be starting that first one next weekend. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah. By the time this is out, that might be out. Bryce, thank you so much for joining.
Terry, thank you so much for having me.
This has been Mage the Podcast, where our focus has always been Earth. Partially because we're terrible with telescopes. The show is made possible by our executive producers, who include, starting with the oracles of the following unexplored places. Ben Mendelow, Oracle of the Secret contained within the non-alcoholic beer section of my local grocery store. Buck Gregory, Oracle of the corner of the refrigerator my housemate refuses to clean. Christopher Phillips, Oracle of the closet that just contains boxes of warranty cards we've all been meaning to get around to filling out. Guy Stewart, Oracle of the Palisades Mall, which cost $250 million to build, is across from New York City, and I don't know that anyone's ever actually seen the 4th floor of it. Jay Widener, Oracle of the famous non-existent alleys of New York City, which seem to exist in movies but not in real life. Josh Hillrup, Oracle of the vegan co-op down the block from me, which is seemingly open 40 minutes a week, and I'm really trying to get there to support a local business, but to buy cashew cheese costs more than my house. Mikhail, Oracle of the one guest bedroom your friend has that seems to be full of Christmas decorations despite them never decorating for Christmas. Puka Oracle of Pattison Station's lower level, which was built but never opened. Sean Gallagher, Oracle of Jazzland, Louisiana's Six Flags franchise, whose sign still says closed for storm. In advance of Hurricane Katrina, it is still not reopened. The Crew of Erebus, Oracle of West Elm. I've just never seen anyone in any of their stores. St. UX Player, Oracle of the Ball Pit at your local fast food place, where the colors of the balls are all just kind of wrong. Sorcerer Sanguine, Oracle of the Wellness Room at work, because sometimes you have a headache and you want to sit down in a dark place for a little, but you also know that it's supposed to be for like people who are nursing and you're not sure and you don't want to take the gamble. Jason Vines, Oracle of Knowledge of the Present that is occurring within a 3-yard radius of their corporeal form roughly 40 to 70% of the time. Along with Archmaster Andrew Adelstein, Archmaster Brad the Blue, Archmaster Dan Svensson, Archmaster Derek Simsek, Archmaster Leroy Bryce, Archmaster Morgan Aran, Archmaster Michael Parker, Archmaster Nathan Weaver, Archmaster Wolf Larison, Alex, Alexia, Ambiversion, Anders S., Anon, Badurfi, Berto, Blaze Hibbert, Blake Ryan, Brandon, Bryce Perry, Bubba the Pale One, Chris Blake, Sinchotis, Daniel Cuppen, Daniel Scribner, Darren Hennessy, David Roy, Dennis Osborne, Eli Levenger, Eric Schwenk, Fragerrock, George Laura, Henry Kraft, Ia Bull, Jason Kennedy, Jason Vines, Jason W. Briggs, Jay Gatsby, Jeff Brin, Jenna F., Jervis Johnson, John Magnuson, Jolyn Andes, Laws and Stuff, Kathleen Halperin, Chris Skinner, Leslie Weatherstone, Manel Canos, Matthew Prohl, Michael Creedle, Maurice Hopkins, Nabarro, Neil Patterson, Nikita Klamenov, Oliver Schindler, Patrick McNamara, Patrick Mulder, Rachel Grace, Ricardo, Richard Bat Brewster, Robart the Robot, Ryan Stray, Rob H., Ryan Kendi, Samuel Tobin, Seven Esses, Starfish, Stephen Carton, Thrice Great, Vincent Hamilton, Walter, William Connolly, and William Martin. Our EP shoutout this week is to Wolf Larison, which makes me think of Wolf Yularen, who tragically died during the destruction of the Death Star at the Battle of Yavin. Before being cut down in his prime, or his 60s or so, this member of the Imperial Security Bureau was known for such pivotal actions as looking at General Tog, looking at Admiral Modi, and being among the first people to notice Darth Vader and Grand Moff Tarkin to walk into that weird conference room where they're all just kind of exposition dumping. Wolf Yularen proves that there's no small parts, only small men. Sure, later he got a massive backstory and got, to talk in Clone Wars, but I'll always remember him from being a small child, seeing A New Hope and going, why would they have a person in a scene if he wasn't going to say anything? This is stupid. And that kicked off my relationship with Star Wars that would follow for the rest of my life. Thanks, Wolf. Rather listen on YouTube? Search Mage the Podcast on YouTube to find our full library there. If you super liked this episode or super didn't, drop us a line at magethepodcast@gmail.com or at Mage the Podcast on Twitter. We have a Hop in Discord community at discord.me/magethepodcast. Mage the Podcast is also at Mastodon at dice.camp/@magethepodcast. If you like us, please give us a review on the platform of your choosing or tell a friend about us. Also go to madesthepodcast.com for show notes and all of our previous shows. Now go change reality. Bye.